Welcome to Life Where Scott Heals. I'm one of your hosts, Kurt Flegel, and I cannot believe that we are entering our 5th season. This, in fact, is episode 1 of season 5 of Life Where Scott Heals, and so we welcome you back, or welcome you for the first time. And this is truly going to be an awesome episode because we are discussing a very important and relevant subject, especially here in the West, here in the United States, and that is mental illness. Where is God in the midst of our struggles with mental illness? Well, we have a very good friend of ours, Grenz, who's going to talk to us and share his story with mental illness and how God intervened and led him through that struggle. So let's just get right into it. Welcome, Brent. Nice to have you.
Nice to be here.
Kim said something earlier as we were praying. She said, God, allow our mess to be our message. And since we're talking about disorders, emotional, mental, that kind of thing, there are some things that you and I have talked frequently about that are your mess. Not saying, not saying I don't have my mess, but we're specifically...
We're talking about me.
We're talking about your mess. So what does your mess look like, and where have you seen God show up in that to make it your message?
Well, first of all, in a general sense, the mess for all of us is sin.
Yeah.
That's the biggest mess in the world.
Right.
But I know we're talking, in my particular case, what we have talked about recently is my bipolar disorder, which I was diagnosed long enough ago that it was actually just... I don't know why this seems important, but a little bit of trivia. It had just gone from being diagnosed or being called manic depressive disorder, and they had just moved it into, probably with whatever level of DSM, which is the diagnostic manual that they use for diagnosing mental disorders. And so it was bipolar, and it was weird because I remember even when I was originally diagnosed, it didn't connect as well. Because manic depression I'd heard of, but bipolar was new. Now, everybody kind of grasped that.
When did it start, or when did you notice that there were things happening?
So someplace between 23 and 24, my world just kind of collapsed in because of the birth of our daughter, which was unexpected. I know how it works, but it was unexpected. The timing was definitely unexpected. We had made a commitment to, or at least a general commitment, that we're going to be married for 5 years, kind of get ourselves established in our careers, have some money saved up, kind of have some balance in our lives.
Oh, balance. What a great myth that is.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's ever happened. So 3 months later, Serena got pregnant. So so Elena came, so I was a brand new father. We were poor as can be. Serena wasn't working because she was home with Elena. I was firmly convinced that I was called to be a pastor, but specifically a pastor on the mission field. So as if not to make it difficult enough, it wasn't just that I needed to go to seminary, but I needed to go to seminary to prepare myself for being out in a completely foreign context in a different country. I couldn't afford seminary, so I found a correspondence seminary in the U.S. that I could do courses through, cassette tapes that I could do. And
let's date this.
Yeah, we're going way back. This is an old tech alert. So I was doing that. That was absolutely miserable in every possible way. It was a total trying to stick a round peg into a square hole kind of thing. Because it was now on this side of it, it was clear that God was not calling me to that. That was what I thought I was called.
Okay. I was wondering, are you talking about the schooling or the calling?
Well, both. So because the calling was a thing of my belief system, which was, and this goes into being bipolar, my belief system was that anything that I needed to do that God wanted me to do had to hurt, had to be miserable, had to be the most difficult thing possible, because it was kind of almost like a Greek mythology story of, just going through trial after trial after trial after trial to get wherever it was you were supposed to get at the other end of it. And I think the other end of it for me would have just been death. Because I would have died and then I wouldn't have to suffer anymore. and we can get back to the theology of all this. But anyway, so I was doing that. That was miserable. I had I was a brand new dad, and I had this, like any dad's not that different for any other father. But especially being a poor father is like I've got to be working all the time so I can make sure and provide for my family. But of course, that takes me away from my family. I felt totally overwhelmed. Blah blah blah. So and then the third piece of that was that I started to get overwhelmed at work. So I was starting to find myself less and less able to cope with just the day-to-day activities and things that I was trying to do at work.
And which was the job at the time?
At that time, I was working for UPS in their phone center and had moved into a position where I was supporting account executives. So basically, if something went wrong with a business's deliveries, then I was the person that had to fix it. So I was kind of the problem solver, which I actually loved the job. I loved the job in general, but it just, that stress, I just started to get to where I wasn't able to handle it, and that was starting to spin out. Because as I felt that I couldn't handle it, then the more every day I was having a harder time coming back to work. And so it was starting to really look like I was probably going to lose my job. And there's probably other factors in there too, but those are the big ones that I remember. So the way that I often explained that period of time in my life was that it's like a juggler who has practiced really, really hard and gotten up to being able to juggle 6 balls. And it's like you can as long as you do, focus and think about what you're doing and practice a million times, you can handle 6 balls. But then somebody in the audience suddenly throws a 7th ball in. And so even though you're this magnificent, amazing juggler and have been holding it all together, that one ball is too many. And when you lose one, you lose them all. And you can't a juggler can't lose one ball and still have the other ones going in most situations, at least not in my metaphor. So they all just pretty much collapsed. So that was the moment at which I had the break that most people do with bipolar, where it snaps, where you can no longer function in doing what you're doing. And for me, what those balls had looked like is especially through high school, I had made it my life's goal to be better than every other human being on the face of the planet. That was, it was not just a minor thing. That was where I was going to be.
That was your
so whatever anybody else had ever done, at least in my world, maybe it's too much to say the rest of the planet, but in my world, I was going to do it better. For instance, I made our church break the rule for Awana. I should say it for people that don't know, that it's basically a church club that looks a lot like Boy Scouts, and you learn verses and then you get little badges and blah, blah, blah. And I had done Awanas, but then I really wanted to be a leader. But you couldn't be a leader unless you were, I think it was college. You had to have graduated from high school, first year of college. So I forced them basically to let me be an Awana leader. I think it was like my junior year of high school. So I broke the rules because I was the guy that could do it and could do it so well. And I was going to be able to handle the job. And I did, great job. I co-led 2 musicals in church. I had a 4.4 grade average. I sang in every choir that you could possibly sing in. And we broke rules on that one too, because you were not allowed to be in the honor choir until your sophomore year. And myself and 2 friends of mine petitioned our choir director and said, we're ready now at the middle of semester, our freshman year. And he fought and fought and fought, and we are good enough, and we're good enough. And so that was kind of how I approached life. It's like, if you don't think I'm good enough, I will force you. I will just break you down eventually. And the reason, but behind that was this theology that I still have, that still sits inside of my core, that I have to continue to just say, Lord, that is not true at all. And that is a theology of worthlessness, a theology of apathy. I had 2 beliefs in how God viewed me. And that is that on a really good day, if I'm doing everything right, then God will ignore me. And if I'm not doing everything perfectly that I need to be doing, then God's mad at me. So pretty much apathy was the thing I was going for. Like, if God completely and totally ignores me, that's my best case scenario.
Wow. Okay, so can we hold there for a second?
Hold. Yeah.
Theology, just so we can define the term, because I think it's good to define terms, is the knowledge of God. When we talk about the knowledge of God, is knowing God, right? Identity, knowing God for his identity. Your knowledge or theology of God, your knowledge of God, was that at best, he was apathetic towards you. At worst, he was Zeus with the lightning bolts. Where did that come from? How did that perspective develop in you, that's how you saw God in relation to you?
So I was born bipolar. The question becomes, how much can you manage it? How excessive is it? And at what point do environmental factors get to the point where it triggers you and it breaks? And for most people, it is in their 20s. And so that's where it was for me. So that's really not all that unusual that I experienced that. Bipolar manifestations are starting to be diagnosed earlier and earlier in kids. And I think it's because our world is just that brutal. And, things that kids are having to go through and traumas that they're experiencing are, making it different. That part of my brain was from the day from the day I can really think about what I thought of God, that's what I thought of God. I mean, that's kind of who he was for me. It wasn't like I thought one way and I had a healthy view of God, and then all of a sudden or over time I could say, I had not a healthy view of God.
And it wasn't taught to you.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. The church culture that I lived in was, and I think a fairly typical American church theology, and that is that we're saved. A healthy church, of course, is going to say that we're saved by grace, and that there's nothing we can do to save ourselves to earn it, that Jesus Christ died on the cross, paid everything for us in full, that coming to him, he will forgive us all of our sins and reconcile us to God. I mean, that's the basic Christian theology of salvation. But the problem is, in the environment I was in, and I know a lot of other churches that were this way, then works starts to really creep in after your salvation and before you get to the point of going to heaven. And it starts to become, you fall back into this pattern of you've got to earn your salvation. And so for an example, a really dumb example in our church, but again, all over the land in the 70s and 80s, was a board, a really poorly made wooden board that had a slide-in thing for numbers and letters, and one of them was attendance. So you could see every week how many people had come to church. The other one that I remember was offering, and this is how much people had given. So publicly displayed right there in the front of the church next to the cross is something that weekly reminds you that somehow there is a good and a bad. We're displaying it to show that somehow we've done something and what we've done is good and this must make God happy. Because that was kind of the way that that was the culture, the way that I felt it is that yes, Jesus saved me, but now I still need to work really, really hard to make it all okay. Bipolar, manic depression, it has its two sides. It has a depressive side and it has the mania side, where you're acting in a way that is inappropriate, that might even be in some cases illegal, that is your emotions going unchecked. It's your emotions without any filter that says these are societal norms and this is what I should or shouldn't do. So I was able to sit on top of that mania by just keeping myself really, really busy. Like I said, I was involved in everything. I was the best at everything. Even the things that I failed at, I quit them strategically. Because there were a couple of different sports that I quit, but I quit them with really, really good excuses. And so it was okay. And like I wrestled and then I quit, but I was 98 pounds at the time. So it was pretty easy for people to accept that I had quit wrestling. The reality was I quit wrestling because I just knew I was going to lose and I couldn't handle that.
Okay, so the question then is was that for other people's perception or your view of yourself that it would look okay?
I always felt like I was a failure. Again, going back to God apathetic or God just ignoring or God mad at me, I always felt like I was failing. So all of these things protected me. I put so many layers of success on there that you would have to pull so much off to ever actually realize I was a failure. Nobody would really pay attention to the fact that who I really was deep down inside, which was a failure.
Yeah.
A disappointment. I never could quite measure up to, where I felt like God wanted me to be. This is what my brain told me was true. And that is a bipolar brain. I mean, a bipolar brain just is throwing things at you that just aren't true. I mean, it's telling you things that just aren't true, and it's giving you worldviews and belief systems that just aren't true. Which is why after I got diagnosed, I needed a lot of therapy, but we'll get to that. We can get to that in a second.
So what was the break? What did the break look like?
Well, that break was in my 20s. So what I had managed to do in my life, with a couple of exceptions, was to run ahead of my failures and to keep everything going. Again, those balls that I was juggling. And my point in saying those different things that happened, the birth of my daughter, being poor, not having much money and feeling like I had to work all the time, feeling that I was called to seminary, called to being a pastor / evangelist / missionary, and that not working out. Those pieces, all those things, all of a sudden I couldn't handle anymore. I couldn't control it. I couldn't keep it all together. And because I couldn't, that's when I started to completely be unable to function in life, period.
What did that look like, though?
Well, that looked like, for instance, at my job, I was spending more time in the bathroom than I was at my little cubicle because nobody knew I was there. I could just stand in there and I could just kind of hang out. And very few people will come bother you in the bathroom. And so literally every day it was becoming more and more and more. But again, I was so good in doing what I was doing that when I was on the floor, when I was sitting at my little cubicle and I was working with these customers or whatever, I was able to do the job well enough that I wasn't technically falling behind on the job. I just was putting in less and less time. But it started to feel like the shoe was going to drop and I was going to lose that job.
Oh, because you said that earlier that you felt like you were getting to a point where they were going to fire you, you were going to lose the job. But that was perception, not reality?
No, I think it was reality.
Oh.
I think it was reality. I think that I think the fact that I hadn't gotten fired as up to that point was just a blessing. I mean, it was just God looking out for me because I probably should have been. I mean, I knew of the problem, but I had no idea how to handle it. So all of what I described in high school, junior high school, that was mania. I mean, that was me living manic right under the cusp of completely losing it and being, to the point where, like I said, you start to do thrill-seeking kind of things and you do things that are illegal and blah, blah, blah. I wasn't there, but I was just constantly sitting right on that edge of just completely flaming out. The best example I can give is that my freshman year of college, I had a friend of mine my best friend from high school, who also was at the same junior college that I was, and she had a huge party at her house, and a lot of them were people that we knew from high school. It was fairly out of control, medium out of control, I don't know. Where you put that, but there was a lot of alcohol and there was a lot of drinking. And I was at the back of her apartment. She had a staircase. I'm doing this like people can see this. She had a staircase that it was freestanding. It was attached at the top of the landing, like a 2-story motel kind of thing. And I was standing on her back fence, and I was just goofing around, and so I jumped up on the edge of the staircase, and I was kind of hanging on, and I think my goal was to try to move my way up, rock climb, basically up.
Wow.
Somebody grabbed my leg, and I'm like, dude, do not grab my leg. I'm like hanging here, don't grab my leg. But they were drunk, so they thought it was funny. So they just kept pulling, and they just kept putting more pressure. Finally, I just let go, and I dropped, because there was no choice there. And her lawn was on a little tiny slope hill, and it was cold that night, and there was dew on the grass. So when my foot hit, it immediately slipped, and all my weight hit, and my ankle just snapped, instantly. So I go around to the front of the apartment. I guess I was raised well. I felt the need to let Denise know that I had to leave. So I knock on the door, and this guy that answered, this guy's name, we called him Bear, I don't remember his name, big old tall basketball player from high school. And he looked at me and I'm like, hey, can you just let, and I mean, I'm like in so much pain, but I'm trying to hold it together. I'm like, could you just let Denise know I gotta go, I hurt my ankle. And he's like, what happened? And I said, I think I might have broken it. And then he's like, and then he just burst into laughter and he's like, dude, you're the only sober person here, which I think was true. I don't think there was any other sober person there. But that was my life, I always found a way to make sure that everybody knew who I was at any given moment. That whatever I did stuck out. And that was the manic side of things. But when the crash happened and I had a true mental breakdown, then the depression just sucked everything that I ever had out of me. So we moved from where we were actually here, we were in San Luis Obispo at the time, and we moved back in with my parents. My mom and Serena Serena's my wife. I need to tell the microphone now. My mom and Serena had been talking, I say behind my back, but that's wrong, I don't mean it in a bad way. I didn't know what the conversation was they were having because I was no longer in a mental place where I could have had a part of the conversation. She was telling my mom, we have got to get someplace safe because he's going to lose his job. I don't know how we'll survive with the baby, with your granddaughter. And so my mom just said, come back and live with me. What Serena told me is, hey, we've been talking about you getting a different career because answering phones at UPS isn't a great career. What about teaching? You can do that in a year. You can get your credential in a year, and then you can, turn around and have a career. And I'm like, okay, I don't care about teaching, but okay, anything I can do in a year sounds good. So that was kind of the reason that she told me we were moving back. But again, it was really because she was just trying to save our marriage and save us and save the baby, and So the depression then became something that made me completely unable to function. Somehow I made it through that year doing the credential program.
Wow.
But I was spending most of my time in bed. And when I say most, I mean like probably 75% of my time in bed. I was fantasizing about two options, and one of them would be, one of the ones that I remember because it was a second story apartment, was that the roof would collapse and just fall on me and crush me, and I would die. And the other one that I wasn't as thrilled about, I liked that one. That was, if it had to rank them, that was not a bad one. The other one was that our apartment would catch on fire, and then I would burn to death.
Wow.
And I was like, ooh, I think that'll hurt, but I didn't care. But both of those had the commonality of the fact that I wouldn't have committed suicide in my mind because I didn't do it. It would just happen and I just would leave. So that's what it looked like at the worst of it all. I mean, that was the low point of my whole experience as far as mental illness goes, is that point at which you're just waiting to die.
Wow.
The only thing you see past the pain at that point
is death.
Death.
That's the escape.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way through. What was the relationship like with Serena, your wife, for the microphone?
Oh. We already established that.
Oh,
now we said it twice.
Now I'm just being redundant.
My gorgeous wife. Make sure you don't edit that out.
I'm glad you said it.
A little more awkward if Kurt says it, just slightly.
So I know exactly what I was experiencing during that time. I'll never 100% know what she was experiencing, which is true of anybody. If it's a major illness or, something that somebody's going through, walking with somebody through cancer or whatever. I mean, there's the person that's going through it, and then there's the person or people that are experiencing it, watching that person, and they're very different experiences.
That seems like it's true with every...
I guess that's true. Yeah, but it becomes more intense. I think
Sure.
as the experience is more intense, than what you're going through is more intense.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
And so, as a young mom, she now had full responsibility for our daughter because I was not functioning. She no longer had a companionship or partnership relationship with me as her husband. That was gone. which are two pretty hard hits for a young woman person, married, to have to go through
with a new child
situations anyway, right? With a new child. It's one thing if you're a single mom and you have a baby. I mean, that's hard enough, but it's another thing to be a married person and basically be a single mom, which is what she was. And so then her relationship to me was no longer a partnership relationship. It was no longer a married relationship where, each of us were doing what we could for one another and ministering to one another and helping each other out and all those things. It was just her. And it was her either parenting me or trying to love me and understand and just be able to say it's not his fault. And so she went back and forth between those all the time. And I remember I think there was more than one time where she was literally pulling the bed sheets off of me and I was holding on to them with everything I had in my power, and she was just screaming at me to get up, and she was screaming at me to go to work. She was getting desperate. I mean, she was getting to that point where she wasn't sure we could be together anymore. And she's had so many friends over the years that are like, why didn't you just divorce him? Because people divorce for a lot less. And to her, it was just it wasn't an option.
Wow.
I mean, she had made her commitment before God that she was my wife and that she was never going to divorce me. But she was starting to have very long conversations with herself mostly and trying to wrestle through, do I physically put distance between us so that she could find a job, so that she could find some way to survive, so that her daughter would be okay. And that was the other thing that I thought about a lot, is I had hoped, there was so many times she left the house and I heard the door close and I thought maybe she'll just never come back, because that would be a blessing, because then I didn't have to feel guilty. And I had, done our relationship in. So it was agony for both of us, but in totally different ways. I mean, our stories are very, very different. The facts are the same, but how we were dealing with it, how we were feeling.
Right, perspective.
Because we did not understand that mental illness, when you're mentally ill, you can't just will yourself to get better.
Yeah.
But neither one of us knew. It wasn't her fault, it wasn't my fault.
And obviously we're sitting here having this conversation, you're not in the bed anymore, so things changed.
Right, yeah.
So where did you see God in this? How did he break through and move the story forward?
Well, I mean, again, I have to reiterate the fact that Serena did not leave me. Serena did not divorce me. That was God protecting both of us. I don't know of an American culture where divorce wasn't normal. She had that choice. She stuck this out because she was willing to stand for what she knew was right before the Lord, because that covenant meant something to her. And so I couldn't appreciate that then. I wasn't in a place I could appreciate that, but I certainly appreciate it now. I mean, so that I didn't have a sound. Had my wife left, had Serena left, had she have taken Alina with her, there's nothing about my life now that would be the same. God was speaking to her when I couldn't, and speaking to her to do something that didn't make any sense for the situation. And God was doing that to protect both of us, and to protect Alina, and to eventually protect Kayla, because there wouldn't have been any Kayla had we not been together. So I mean, that was the first place where God was there that entire time, watching over us.
Like you said, to protect both of you. Well, it's very clear how that was a protection for you, because she was outside of the situation, able to speak into it and stick it out. But how is that, just from your perspective, how is that a protection for her not divorcing?
Well, because I think I'm a pretty good guy. I think that our relationship has been an incredible partnership. I mean, God's given us 25 years of an incredible, amazing relationship. This was a really good opportunity. If you're going to say, here's top 10 divorce reasons, when just in our own flesh and our own thinking, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's a pretty good one.
Yeah.
Or that's like a number 6. That's a pretty good one. I mean, I put that way up there that most people would have been like, yeah, you could have left him and it would have been fine.
Yeah.
You know, like nobody would bat an eye. Everybody would have understood.
Mm-hmm.
So she lived out that sacrificial commitment to that covenant that has allowed us to have the incredible relationship that we have. For not just for us, but for both of our girls, and hopefully for a whole lot of other people, you know, that we've been able to minister to, and know, you know, get to know.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and we haven't even gotten to the good. I mean, we haven't even gotten to the. So those are great, but those didn't deal with the bipolar.
Yeah.
The bipolar was because I had a man who counseled me as a therapist. He was my therapist, who was extremely perceptive and quickly figured out that I was bipolar and said, "We've got to get you to a psychiatrist." And he said, "I've got a guy I can refer you to." Got me referred to that psychiatrist, and then quickly I was put on meds for bipolar. I don't know all the other mental illnesses that are similar to bipolar, but I've heard similar stories, and that is specifically with bipolar. It is very unlikely that the first regimen of meds that you're put on will work. Because it all depends on your physiology, it all depends on your neurology. It's just the way your body metabolizes things, the way your hormones work, all those things. So there's multiple courses of treatment, and the chance of, like I said, the chance of maybe the first one you try actually working. I don't know of anybody outside of myself that the very first medication they were put on, they've continued to be successful with it. And for me, it was successful for about 20 years.
Wow.
The lithium worked well for about 20 years, and then it started not working so well, so we've had to change a little bit. But to be in a place where God brought me to this man who was a Christian man, therapist, brought me to him, he quickly realized what was going on, but he wasn't a medical doctor, he wasn't a psychiatrist, he was a psychologist. So at least in the state of California, you can't prescribe meds. So
Right.
that's why he had to get me to a psychiatrist. And then that same person, I continued in a counseling relationship with him for probably a year and a half. And a lot of things were accomplished over that year and a half, but the biggest one was he re-taught me who God really is, who I really was, how God really sees his children, what that's supposed to look like, and began to teach me how to reframe, to a certain degree, every decision I make and every decision anybody makes that I interact with, and reframe it within the framework of truth instead of a framework of delusion, which is really what I had. And the irony is, when I first went to his practice and filled out the little questionnaire thing when I was first going, he referred me to one of his intern lackeys, and that guy was horrible for me.
Sorry, Dan.
No, he knows. Because then what happened is, so I went to like 4 or 5 sessions with that guy, and I would come out every night, and Serena would pick me up. And, the question she would ask is, how did it go? And I said, well, I'm more depressed now than I was when I walked through the room. And I was really going there because of depression. But I just quit. And when I quit, or again, talk about screwed up belief system, I believed at the time that we moved back to Porterville to live with my parents and we started this process, I believed that all psychology was demonic. All therapy that was not biblically based therapy. And when I say biblically based therapy, I had a very narrow view. Because when you believe in your heart that the best you can get from God is apathy, you become legalistic very quickly, because legalism then also becomes a shield for which you can deflect your own inadequacies by pointing out everybody else's. Which is also why I had to be so good at everything, because that gave me the authority.
Yeah.
That gave me, I was the smart one, I was the good student, I was the good musician, I was the good Christian, so therefore people would listen to me. And so my judgment meant something. And when I did that was a great deflection. So within that legalism one of the manifestations of that was this idea that all therapy was demonic. Because Freud was a wackadoodle, because he was wrong, then everybody was wrong. And so for me to step through that door to begin with was a huge thing.
Wow.
And so then for him to stick me with the wrong guy, once I flamed out of that one, I told Serena, I am never going back. Because this just proved exactly, what I believed. And it was, I think, almost a year later that I went back. And Dan's like, do you want to do this again? And I said, only if I see you. So I refuse to see anybody else. So I'm sorry if I'm not pointing it out to people clearly. Hopefully they can re-listen to the podcast a couple times and figure out God is all over this.
Yeah.
I mean, God's everywhere in this.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Well, can we talk specifically, if you don't mind, about the things that Dan taught you that reframed God's identity and your identity?
It was so long ago. Let's go back to the thing I keep saying over and over again. The two options I had was God apathetic and ignoring me, or God mad at me. And just the plain and simple truth that we know from Scripture is that neither one of those things are true. In fact, neither one of those things are possible for believers. Because if they are, then the cross doesn't mean anything.
Right.
If Jesus Christ did not go to the cross to atone, to cover every single sin any human being could ever commit, then that means there's always sins left over. And if there's sins left over, then we cannot ever be in the presence of a holy God, because he can't be where sin is.
And the question is which sin is left over? And then there's a whole bunch of uncertainty and insecurity.
Yeah, the worst ones, or maybe the little ones, or the big ones, or whatever. So what he was teaching me was grace, which was a word I had heard many, 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 many times in my life.
Very churchy, good
and
word.
Had taught other people, and done Bible studies, because I was the guy who did Bible studies. It came up all the time in Awanas, and I memorized lots of verses because I memorized. I had so many verses memorized because, again, I had to beat whoever else had a lot of memory. So whoever the next best person was memorizing verses, I had to beat them. So, and I'm sure a lot of those had the word grace in them. But I think the problem was I knew the word grace. I'm not sure I actually understood the concept, because I couldn't allow the thought that God had provided it for me, and therefore I could not dispense it to other people. And that's probably been the biggest shift for me personally. That piece of it has definitely changed. I hate being a legalist. Every time I start to move towards that, I try to run away from that. But I still struggle with it in my own life. I think many of us do, most of us do, at our weakest moments. But Dan taught me that is true. Whether I totally get it all the time or not, that God's grace was true, and God's grace was all-encompassing. And years later, I would end up in a recovery group with a guy who every time he prayed always he would say, God, I'm your favorite kid. And which sounds really arrogant, but then you realize every single follower of Christ can pray that same prayer, because we can't do that as people. We can't. Favorite means you got to have one favorite. You can't have everybody's your favorite.
From an earthly perspective.
From an earthly perspective, but God can do it. And so that is the concept of grace: is that we are all His favorite kid, every single moment of every single day, in every single situation.
Yeah, that's
whether we're doing what we should do or not. As the reformers would say when they talk about being an image bearer, whether we are being good image bearers of God or not, or lousy image bearers of God, God still loves us just as much. I'm not sure it took us a year and a half to get to that, but like we probably covered other things, but that's the piece that was missing. That's the piece I never understood. And that's the only piece that matters to a certain degree. Like, if you understand that, if you can accept that, which is to say accept the Lord and His love and let go and give it to Him. And see, and that was the other part, the part that I still struggle with, is wanting to control it all. Because that was the way of me proving that I was okay. And since God wasn't going to necessarily, God wasn't really going to ever be happy with me anyway, then the best I could do is control what I could control. And that struggle is still there. And so, again, that concept of grace is that concept of letting that control go and letting the Lord take control in every part of my life. And that's really still continues to be very, very hard for me.
Yeah, I think for all of us it's hard because it's the idea that we're all God's favorite comes down to this understanding of, or at least affirmation of the fact of God's infinite nature. We are all finite. We live in a universe where there's beginnings and endings, where there's limitations on energy and resources. And so everything we look around and see, everything has like a finite nature to it. And now we're talking about three beings who are infinite in their community with each other, and their complete giving of themselves to each other, never holding back from one another, giving and receiving completely in perfect unity, and that it's infinite in nature. And then out of that infinitude, I love that word, infinitude, that they relate to us as finite creatures. Well, it's not surprising to me that atheists look at God, at Jesus, at the Christian faith and go, that's ridiculous. Because from a finite standpoint, it is ridiculous. Because an infinite God makes no sense to a finite creature. It just makes no sense. So what we don't understand is what we run from. What is unknown to us is what we run from. And we try to figure something else out. And here's the great thing about God's infinite love. It is the very thing we can't understand and scares us. And so what we don't understand and what is unknown to us, we run from. And God in his infinite love keeps coming after us because he's infinite love. The very thing that makes us run is the very thing that always wins us back. And he has no end to the patience and the joy and the love that he has for us. So the very thing that makes us cut and run is the thing that brings us back. And for me, in this season, it is learning to trust more and more and more that God is the safest place on earth. There is no one or nothing else that is infinite. Not my wife or anyone else. And so I've learned through the years, through trial and error and lots of pain, of putting my trust in people more than God, that don't work. And that though I don't understand it, and that's the point, that I can come to God and say, God, I don't love like you. In the past, that was an insecure statement. I don't love like you meant out of pride that I can't handle that. I cannot handle the fact that I don't love like you. And so I run from that. Now, that acknowledgement does not put insecurity in me and a desire to run from God. Me saying, God, I don't love like you is a place of safety because, of course, he's infinite. I could never love like him. But what it does is no longer makes me run away from him. More and more often, sometimes it still does, but more and more often, it draws me in to go, so I don't love like you. I need a greater experience of your love. The more I confess that honestly before him, the more I'm ready to receive more of his love. And the more I receive it, the more I reflect it. I reflect God's love to other people to the degree I'm receiving it from him. And it comes from my acknowledgement and honesty with no insecurity. And that has changed the ballgame for me. I make it kind of a mantra, might be a word that people are uncomfortable with. But in my prayers, it is a line I say a lot, you're the safest place on earth. You're infinite love, and I don't even get it. I don't understand it, but I accept it now. And that's the thing that's been the biggest change. I don't understand, but I accept what I don't understand, and I come anyway.
When you're talking about that, there's that song that actually I learned it when we were, not this time I went to church with you guys, but the last time I went. The first two lines of Jireh. It's like, I'll never be more loved than I am right now. I wasn't holding you up, so how could I ever let you down? You know, I mean, because everything you were sharing, I was just like, oh my gosh. Like, that was so much of, like, a lot of the things that we were just talking about, that Kurt and I were talking about yesterday during our meeting, about, you know, how I felt about everything that happened in Cayucas in my youth ministry, and how, you know, I felt like a failure, and I've been holding on to it. Because I was super depressed. I was... I mean, it was a struggle most of the time, or half the time, especially towards the end, to just show up. And I was so mad at God for putting me in that situation. Because I was like, the kids deserve better. You know, that's the performance aspect of that. I'm like, the kids deserve better than this. God's like, I was never surprised that you were going through this. Hello. But, like, he's like, you weren't laying me down because this is where I put you. And it wasn't a surprise to me what you were going through in that season. So how can you say you let me down when I put you there in the first place? It wasn't your responsibility to do anything other than show up when I asked you to. So Jireh has been on my playlist ever since I looked it up on YouTube. I'm just like, those two lines always hit me.
Same again.
I'll never be more loved than I am right now. Wasn't holding you up, so there's nothing I can do to let you down. That is like right now, lately it's been my mantra, like, of, remember, there's nothing you can do to make him love you more. There's nothing you can do to make him love you less. His love is infinite, so it's not going to grow or diminish.
There's nothing we can add to God. Right? There's nothing, so he can never be disappointed with us because he has no expectations of us adding anything to him. He is our power and energy. He is our wisdom. He is our knowledge. So when he gives of his love, it's unconditional.
I mean, when you think about the relationship of the Trinity, you've got three people that are always finding ways to love the other person.
Yes.
And so the only thing that exists in the relationship between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit is just love. Perfect love. And they need absolutely nothing.
Right.
So God did not create Adam and Eve because he was lonely. He created them because he wanted human beings to enjoy the same love that he has within the Godhead, within that triune relationship. He wanted us to have as much of an understanding as we could possibly have of that. I mean, it's way more than we could ever handle.
Right,
because we're human.
Right.
Like, we couldn't, it'd kill us to a certain degree. I mean, we
it would
could
destroy
never,
us.
Yeah. So I think it's easy to look at our relationship with God. I mean, it is very easy, and say, oh, I need to do the right thing because then that'll make him happy. Or I need to do the right thing because then that'll make God look good. Well, no, you can't make God look bad. That's
right.
that's the benefit of being perfect. Is there's no way to make him look bad. When I let go of that pressure on myself, when I release that lie, and can just say, I want to do this because I will be more like Jesus is. There isn't anything greater that I could possibly do. I want to enjoy that. I want to be like him. I want other people to see him in me. But I'm under no illusion or expectation that I'm going to do that perfectly.
You saying that, like, right? We can't make God look bad. I thought immediately of the plagues in Egypt, which, if you look at the plagues by themselves for a moment, they are these 10 events that happened in Egypt that where God's power overcame something in Egypt and messed it all up that the Egyptians worshipped as God. Right? Like the Nile had blood in it. They worshipped the Nile River as a god. The sun went dark, Ra, the sun god, right? God blotted out the sun. How did that happen? Two things happened in conjunction with each other to create God's being glorified through the plagues. Moses' obedience and Pharaoh's disobedience. And both together.
Still pointing to him.
God worked through Moses, who came in alignment and agreement with God, and Moses was blessed through being in alignment with God. He glorified God through his obedience and found blessing in that. Pharaoh disagreed and fought against God, and God glorified himself despite Pharaoh's disobedience. Neither one could make God look bad, but one enjoyed the process and one did not. And that's where love comes in. Religion and legalism is what the word I would say is called obligation.
Right.
God's love and a relationship with him is the word I call invitation. Like, I will beat myself up over feeling anxious and insecure from an earthly perspective, but from God's perspective, it is the gaslight coming on, which is an invitation to do what?
Fill it up.
Fill it up. So my anxiety, my insecurity, my sin, all those things are actually an empty cup that I'm being invited to lift up, to be filled up. It's invitation. That's the purest word I can think of for what a relationship with God looks like. Everything is invitation. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burden, and I will give you rest. For I am lowly of spirit, and I am not standing over you judging you. I'm at your feet washing your feet. Come down here with me. So, yeah, that's the difference from an earthly perspective and seeing things from a heavenly perspective. And so more and more I'm just asking God, show me everything through your eyes. Let me see. And I really appreciate you sharing your story.
And I feel like we're winding down.
Yes.
Can I add one other thing?
Yeah, and then I would like you to pray for everyone
okay.
listening.
Sure. Life hurts, God heals. I mean, that's kind of the point, right? And you were asking me some of that. And I don't think I've really gotten to the thing that I think about the most. The difference. So this is, had God not have intervened at that point, had I still been, mentally untreated, mentally ill, what would that look like versus now? And you and I have talked tons about pornography addiction. That started for me when I was like 12 years old, which is all a whole other interesting thing, because so add that to it, and so I had to have layers of protection even deeper, so nobody ever knew that, so I could hide that. And it wasn't until my 20s that I was willing to admit it, that was what was going on. And the interesting thing is, it's right in that same time frame that the Lord saved me. So I don't think there's any. I don't think that was an accident. That I finally got to where I admitted the deepest point of shame, the thing that I had hidden the most in my life. When I finally was willing to open up about that, then the Lord came into my life. And I think that, so he was just waiting it out. Because I had been raised in the church, so I knew the gospel, and I heard the gospel, and I'd even said a prayer at one point in my life, but I did not have a true relationship with him, because what he needed was for me to let go and to give that up. But in that, with the pornography issue, it became, it continued to become an issue, but it came to a point where I really wanted to deal with it. So I found a curriculum that I wanted for me to try to help me work through that, so I could begin to have victory in that area. But when I went to this training, I thought, well, if it's good enough for me, I bet there's one or two other people in the universe that might have, the same struggle. And I found a few more of them, kind of gathered them up, in a group, and then we formed this group. And it lasted about 10 years. And over the course of those 10 years, I can think of, 4 different guys that as I got to know them, that I went, I think you're bipolar. Like, I couldn't say anything else because I didn't know any other thing. But that was a thing. I knew that one. I knew that one. And I'm like, look, I'm not a psychiatrist. I might be wrong, but I think a lot of what's going on here, because there's a high correlation between, there's a ton of research out there. There's a high correlation between inappropriate or unhealthy or risky sexual behaviors and bipolar, because that goes along with the mania. And so at first it was surprising to me. I'm like, wait, I think all these bipolar people are ending up in my group, and I don't know why, because I didn't know about that, that there was a connection there. But out of the 4, I'm pretty sure that 3 of them were diagnosed bipolar. So like 75% is pretty good for a layperson to be diagnosing people with mental illness. And I have had hundreds of conversations with people outside of that where somebody else in their family is bipolar, or I've just been able to share what it is like to be mentally ill, because I wear it as a badge of honor. Because for me, my identity isn't in being bipolar. My identity is in Christ. But it's like, look how messed up I should be. And I know, I mean, and it's like, hey, I know I'm barely functioning, but I'm doing pretty well. Like, look at what Jesus has done to bring this mess. And you talked about mess, right? And bring that into a place where I do okay most of the time, and I'm able to function well. And
have a rich marriage.
And I have a phenomenal marriage, and I have 2 great girls, and I've had a incredible teaching career, and I've had tons of opportunities to minister to people. And most bipolar people do not do well. That is a piece of who I am, and such a big piece of who I am. It has been given me an opportunity to give God glory over and over and over again for letting me be bipolar and all that that's meant and all that we went through. So in our church last week, we've been going through Romans, and we just hit Romans 8.
Oh, man.
What is it, 26? That God works all things together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purposes.
It's 28.
Is it 28?
Yeah.
But those are my experience, that's one of those experiences where I can look down the lens of 25 years ago and say, oh yeah, God worked incredible things that were good out of that. So the experience was horrible, but God has redeemed it, and God has used it, and and I'm glad it's in the what do they say, rear view mirror.
Yeah.
I really don't want to go through that again, but totally worth it. It was exactly what he wanted.
And thus your mess has become your message.
It's like every single story of our lives, if for those that are in a relationship with him, God's always the hero.
Yeah.
And that's what I would say. God's always the hero.
Yeah. Well, pray. Would you mind?
Oh Lord, I'm tired. It's just a lot to think about and process. And Lord, I know that there are people right now listening to what we're saying that are in the middle of a mess, either because of their own decisions or somebody else's decisions, or just the environment that they find themselves in. I don't diminish that pain at all. I don't diminish what it is to suffer, Lord, and to pretend like that's just, we should just put a smile on our face and pretend like it's all okay, Lord, because it isn't. It hurts deeply sometimes, Lord, but we know that you never stop loving us, Lord, and you never stop reaching your hand out to us and inviting us to hold on to you, Lord, and sometimes there's nothing else we can hold on to except for you. But I just pray that if anybody is listening and they have not yet handed the reins of their lives over to you, that they would do it right now, Lord, in this moment. Lord, to surrender whatever it is right now that is making life so hard, so difficult. And they would let you, Lord, reach down and just begin to walk with you through their pain. Lord, I ask specifically, Lord, if it is something that is a mental illness, Lord, you would give people the wisdom to know what they need to do to get help. Meds are good when administered properly, Lord, and by people who know what they're doing. Lord, you've made some really, really, really smart people over the years that have found ways to deal with these situations, Lord, and to guide people through. In the same way with godly therapists, Lord, we're just so grateful. Lord, I know it seems weird that we would have to pay people to listen to us, But sometimes that's okay, Lord. Sometimes we want to be pointed in the right direction, Lord, to get help. And if it's a situation like it was for me, Lord, that my thinking was so screwed up, Lord, my understanding of you was so wrong, that you would help in whatever way it takes, Lord, that you would help people to begin to understand you as who you are, that you are, as Kurt said, your love is infinite. Lord, you are not coming from a place of weakness ever. Lord, you are always coming from a place of strength, and therefore we can trust you with everything. We can recognize, Lord, that you are our rock, and you are our salvation. Lord, and that just like a mother bird does with newborn chicks, Lord, you come in and you surround us with your wings. Lord, you cover us and protect us. And Lord, we have nothing in our lives that should cause us to feel like we need to run from you. Lord, Jesus paid for everything that we could ever have to worry about. Our sins are gone. Our sins are forgiven. Lord, there's nothing but joy. There's nothing but love. There's nothing but hope. So I just pray right now, Lord, for every single person who's listening to us, Lord, that they would feel joy, and they would feel hope, and they would feel peace, because you, God, are the hero of every story. And we just love you, and we thank you that you never give up on us, and you always love us. And we're always your favorite kids. In your precious and holy name. Amen.
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 Brett, thank you for being so honest.
I don't know any other option.
Well, I appreciate that.
Sometimes maybe too honest.
Well, I can't speak for anyone else. I can only speak for me, and I appreciate too honest. So, so thank you. This is great. Yeah, huge that you were willing to come on and share this. There's power in this, so thank you.
You're welcome. Hanging out with the two of you isn't the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
I agree. I agree with that.
Not too bad.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Life Hurts, God Heals. Before you go, let me ask you a question. Are you stuck in any way in your life? Whether it's being stuck in past wounds that you can't seem to get over, or whether it's just being stuck in certain patterns of thinking and behaving now that you just can't seem to get past, or you feel stuck when it comes to the future. You want to know what God has for you and how to move into that. Well, let me help you with that. As a coach, my goal is to help you discover who God made you to be. What is your unique identity? Let me help you discover that, because everything else you want out of life flows from that. If you're interested in having a consultation with me, you can reach me at coachkurt777@gmail.com. Until next time, remember, you are God's beloved, so be loved.